All right, Alexander, let's talk about the elections in Austria and the results, which show the Freedom Party has won the elections. They came in first with about 30% of the vote. The ruling People's Party, they came in second, the party that's currently governing. They came in second, not far behind, 3 or 4 points behind the Freedom Party and the Social Democrats. They came in third. And this is freaking out the globalists, the EU officials in Brussels, because they consider the Freedom Party as far right. Any party that doesn't fall in line with the ideology of Brussels or the globalist is considered far right. Freedom Party's platform is anti-immigration, migration, and they would like the conflict in Ukraine to wind down. They want the conflict to stop, no more money, no more weapons to Zelensky, and the resumption of trade with Russia, specifically Russian energy, Russian gas, and to have these in a platform, in a party platform, and then win the elections with this platform, understandably has panicked and triggered the globalists and the officials in Brussels. So, what are your thoughts on the Freedom Party's victory? They will not be allowed to govern, is my thinking on all of this. But what do you think?
I think before we discuss what's going to happen, I think we should first of all discuss what has happened. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about Austria and its politics since the Second World War, because you need to understand that to understand the scale of this moment, because I can very well remember a time when Austria was considered a very left-wing, very social democratic place. It used to vote in social democrat governments, one after the other, election after election. And there was this figure, this personality, Bruno Kreisky, who was the leader of the Social Democratic Party of Austria, who seemed to be basically Austria's permanent chancellor. And by most accounts, by the way, he governed well. I mean, I wasn't intimately connected with Austria at that time, but, he was always there. He was a permanent fixture on the European scene. Austria was thought of in those days as a very social democratic sort of place. Vienna especially, very left-wing place. There was talk about Red Vienna. I know people think of Vienna as the capital of the Habsburgs, but it always had that other side, that other dimension. So, a situation today when the Social Democrats come third, a centre-right party comes second, and a party like the Freedom Party wins almost a third of the vote in an Austrian election. Would once upon a time, not so very long ago, well within my, memory, adult memory, that would have just been considered inconceivable, just beyond anybody's imagination. And yet that is where we are. And that tells you lots of things about the gradual turning away from the political establishment, the old establishment that is taking place right across Europe. We've seen it in France with the rise of Le Pen, and in a different kind of way with Mélenchon. We see this in Germany with the rise of the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht. We've seen this in Italy, and now we've seen it in Austria, one of the last places in some respects, where one might have expected to see it. And we saw it in the Netherlands also, with the rise of Geert Wilders. And the reasons are always the same. We have parties, governments, that govern in all of these countries that are no longer responsive to people, the people they govern, who take their orders from Brussels and ultimately from Washington, who allow essentially unrestricted immigration, which people have never liked, never at any time they liked. They see sovereignty, the national sovereignty of these countries diluted so that decisions are made elsewhere. And again, people generally don't like that. They see economic policies, neoliberal economic policies that they don't like. They see neoliberal social policies, which we are not going to discuss in detail, but people don't like those either. And by the way, Austria has also been a Catholic conservative place, even as it's been at the same time a social democratic and left-wing place. So all of this has come together. And in the case of Austria, a very close relationship, economic relationship with Russia. Remember, Austria is not a member of NATO. It's a neutral country. It is much closer to Russia geographically and perhaps psychologically than most places in certainly Western and Central Europe have been. The Russians occupied half of Austria until the mid 1950s when they agreed to withdraw. They occupied parts of Vienna. Um, so there's that long historic connection, and a connection that goes back beyond that, to the era of Metternich, when Austria was still an empire. So the Austrians have a strong historic connection with Russia, a very strong economic connection with Russia. Last time I was in Vienna was in 2015, and I was struck by how visible the economic relationship with Russia at that time was when you spent any time in Vienna at all. All of that has been thrown away in a way that, just as in Germany, has affected Austria's economy. And the Austrian people are saying, enough, we want change. And they're voting now in ever bigger numbers for the Freedom Party, which is a sovereigntist party, wants better relations with Russia, wants restrictions on immigration, is skeptical, was putting it mildly, about the EU, which is a party that is seen as reasserting Austrian national interests. This party, in an electoral earthquake, has come first. And the extraordinary thing is, none of this is going to change anything. Because as we've seen in Germany, as we see in France, as we've seen in Italy, you can vote for who you like nowadays in Europe, in EU states, but always arrangements will be made by the EU centre and by the various parties, establishment parties that are still there. They're always going to work things out so that the party that wins loses and the parties that lose win. So already there is talk that the Austrian Freedom Party, despite coming first, a convincing first, by the way, a significant margin of victory over the People's Party, which is, as I said, is now the establishment party in Germany, the centre-right party. Nonetheless, they're going to be excluded from power. All the talk is that the People's Party and the Social Democrats, the discredited establishment that has just lost the election, are nonetheless going to be the people who will form the next government. That is the reality of politics in Europe now.
Standard playbook for the Europeans.
Exactly.
If you don't come first, then you get the coalition parties to vow that they will never form a government with the winning party, and then you get the second and third place parties to align and to create a government that's going to be Brussels EU focused.
Yeah,
it doesn't change, but it's rotting. This plan that they continue to throw out there every time they don't get their way in an election, it's starting to decay. It's not working anymore, and sooner or later, the parties that people vote for are going to have to govern, or they're going to be required to govern, because the EU is not going to be able to exert this type of influence anymore.
You are absolutely correct. Now, if you go to France, if you go to Germany, if you go to Austria, let's repeat the point that I've just been making, you've been making. The political forces which are rising are of a sort which once upon a time nobody could ever have imagined would win elections. Go back 20 years in France, and the Rassemblement National and its predecessor parties, getting around 5, 7% of the vote, that kind of thing. Now they've got a third of the vote. You see Meloni, who's Prime Minister of Italy. She comes from a radical right-wing background, just to say, more radical than she's chose to show, but once that would have been enough to exclude her. And in Germany, we see radical parties on both the left and the right making major inroads. And in Austria, where it would have once been unthinkable that a party like the Freedom Party, a right-wing party of the kind that it is, would win an election. By every objective measure, they've just won the election. And what is causing this radicalization? It is precisely the fact that the EU centre exercises control in a way that shows indifference to the people of Europe. So they are starting to put away their inhibitions, and they're starting to vote increasingly for parties that are more reflective of their opinions, of their feelings, and of their concerns. And whilst the EU centre continues to exercise the control that it does, and whilst it continues to insist on the sort of policies that it insists upon being followed, and whilst it continues to try to exclude parties that challenge its policies, this radicalization will continue. So the best thing, electorally speaking, for the Freedom Party is precisely that they should be excluded from power, so they don't have to take responsibility now. This unsatisfactory coalition of defeated parties forms the government of Austria. Economic conditions continue to worsen, which they will, because how can they improve whilst the same set of policies are being followed? And eventually we will get into a situation where in Austria it becomes impossible, as you said, to keep the Freedom Party away, prevented from forming a government.
Yeah, it's becoming impossible to keep the AfD away. It's going to be impossible to keep the Freedom Party away. Orban, he's making moves, long-term moves, 5-year plan to create a Patriots party or Patriots coalition within the European Union. Orban aligned with Fico, aligning with Babiš in Czech Republic, which actually did very well in elections last week as well.
Yeah,
and aligning with the Freedom Party.
Correct.
In Austria.
Correct.
And so the center in Brussels is not going to be able to hold this back. You could even throw in Le Pen. Maybe you could throw in Le Pen into this grouping as well.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Meloni, she doesn't want to be associated with Orban and his plans for the European Union. But this is the trajectory of things. This is where the momentum is. It's also a vote against Project Ukraine, which is also significant. What happened in Austria was a vote against Zelensky and against Project Ukraine. So that's the situation in Austria. That's the situation in Europe, and the EU. They can keep this going for another couple more years, but eventually the wheels are going to come off.
I completely agree. The other thing that might happen in Austria is that eventually you might start to see, just as you see in Germany with the emergence of Sarah Wagenknecht, you might start to see something start to happen on the left. Now, as I said, this was a place which had a left-wing tradition. I mean, people talked, as I said, about Red Vienna. There was even a civil war, by the way, between right and left in Austria in the 1920s. It was only over within about 2 weeks or something, but there is a tradition for this. And I saw a couple of months ago the Austrian Communist Party, believe it or not, it still exists. It managed to win a local election in Salzburg, the birthplace of Mozart. Again, if you go there, you'd be very surprised that anybody votes communist or for a party that calls itself communist in a place like Salzburg. But it did happen. So, obviously, this is a fossil. This party is a fossil of the Cold War. But it might be that a more modern, more up-to-date, more sovereigntist left-wing party, distinguished from the Social Democrats, like Sarah Wagenknecht, might emerge in Austria. And that might also have an effect on the political system. It won't split. This is, I think, something we've learned from developments in Germany. It won't take away votes from the Freedom Party, which appears to right of centre people. But it will take votes from what's left of the former SPD. And it will accelerate that process of collapse that you've mentioned.
Well, yeah, because the point of everything that's happening in Germany and the lesson to take away from all of this is that there is no right and left anymore.
Exactly.
Forget about the right and the left.
Exactly.
What you're seeing play out now across the entire collective West is a fight between the globalists and the sovereigntists.
Correct.
I don't know if you have any other better words to describe the two groupings, but even the coalitions that the EU puts together when elections come around, whether it's the Czech Republic, whether it's in France, whatever, they cobble together these groupings, which are not really center right or center left or anything like that. They're just parties that they put together to win elections that have pledged their allegiance to the European Union. They can include anarchists, they can include communists, they can include neoliberals, they can include far-right parties. They don't care. As long as they promise to bow down to the EU, then the EU creates these coalitions to go up in elections against someone like Orban. I think Hungary's a good example, where Orban took on a grouping of 5 or 6 different parties that had no business being together under one umbrella. No business at all, but the EU put them together, and they promised allegiance to the European Union. But that's what you have going on here, because someone like Fico's left.
Yeah.
He's on the left, and he's aligned
but
with
he
Orban.
is sovereigntist.
He's a sovereigntist.
And he gets on very well with Orban.
Sovereigntists versus, yeah.
He gets on very well with Orban. Yeah. Just like in the Czech Republic, the old Communist Party, which still exists there too, basically is lined up with Babiš, because even though Babiš is absolutely right, they still have more in common with him because they are, in Czech terms, relative to the EU project, sovereigntists, and so is Babiš, and the present government are not. So that's what it all amounts to. But you're absolutely right. It's the sovereigntists on each side. They're right and left sovereigntists. They're right and left. And there are globalists who call themselves right and left. But the real division is not between left and right. It is between sovereigntists and globalists, between sovereigntists and EU integrationists. That's the real division in Europe now.
Yeah, division across much of the collective West as well. I would even say, even in the United States. You can
I would say exactly the same.
To the United States as well.
I would say exactly the same. I agree.
Yeah. All right, we will end the video there. TheDuran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and Twitter X. And go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch. Like the shirts that we are wearing today in this video, there is a link to our shop in the description box down below. Take care.